Welcome, wanderer of the quiet hour. Tonight, you're not chasing stories that shout. You're walking softly through the margins of history into old cities with no endings, into kingdoms that made no noise when they disappeared. They left no thrones behind, only silence. No monuments of glory, only shapes in the dust. Gold was hidden, maps were burned, and still the world turned. This is not a tale of battle or crown. It is the hush between pages, a lullaby wrapped in ruins, where empires once whispered and now only the wind remembers. So lay back, let your breath slow. Let the forgotten corners of history rock you gently back to sleep. Asterisk, you wake into a land without sharp edges. The earth beneath you feels ancient but unhurried, a patchwork of hills and dry riverbeds, where trees grow with just enough will to survive, and winds blow more from memory than force. This is a place where kingdoms rose not with a roar, but with a nod. You lie in the shadow of one now. The kingdom of Mitanni, long vanished, never fully carved its name into history. It left behind no walls to conquer, no epic statues to outstare time. What it left instead was something softer, the echo of diplomacy, of shared horses and shared gods, of kings who whispered instead of shouting. You begin to walk, slowly, across what was once northern Mesopotamia. Around you lies the old land, between rivers fertile once, thirsty now, and here, in this sliver of dust and forgotten script, Mitanni lived. It wasn't the biggest kingdom, not the richest. It was a thread woven into stronger tapestries, caught between Egypt and the Hittites, cradled beneath Assyria's growing shadow. But for a time, Mitanni ruled the rhythm. Not the headlines, but the spaces between them. There were cities, Washakani, its capital, whose exact location still evades even the best guess. Archaeologists argue gently. The maps suggest. The soil says little. Maybe it was by the Kaba river. Maybe the river changed its mind. Maybe the city itself did not wish to be remembered so clearly. That feels like Mitanni's way. Present, but not imposing. Powerful, but polite. The kings of Mitanni bore names borrowed from other tongues. Ardatama, Tushratta, Shutana, names wrapped in the sounds of Indurian gods, yet written in cuneiform script on clay tablets that cracked in the sun. They married their daughters to pharaohs. They sent letters, not threats. One such letter still survives, addressed to Amenhotep III, full of silk and diplomacy, gifting horses, offering blessings. It reads like something between a prayer and a promise. You imagine one of these kings now, standing at a palace window, the wind stirring his robe, the sun bouncing off alabaster floor. He's watching the horizon, not for enemies, but for clouds, the kind that bring rain or stories. There are no armies on the march today, just the soft dust of merchants returning from Hattusa, their carts heavy with lapis and linen. A temple priest chants nearby, naming gods shared with India, but prayed to in Akkadian. The king smiles, almost invisible in history, but perfectly alive in this moment, and then, over generations, it begins to dim, the borders blur. Assyria begins to stretch. The Hittites grow sharper, more impatient. Mitanni, gentle and thin at the seams, doesn't crumble. It surrenders by degrees. Some cities defect, others wait too long. There is no dramatic battle, no fiery last stand, just treaties forgotten, vassals switching sides, maps redrawn with firmer ink. Even the name of its capital slips away. Washakani disappears not in fire, but in sand. The rivers shift, the texts grow rare. Later, kings claim the land, but they don't retell the stories. Mitanni becomes a placeholder in textbooks, a line between the Hittites and the Assyrians. A footnote under a column labeled Late Bronze Age. But here, in the warm hush of this ancient plain, it feels more like a breath that was held, and then exhaled too slowly to notice. You lie back, the sun warm but forgiving, your fingers curling into earth that once knew palaces, poets, and horses trained for perfect symmetry. You close your eyes, and you can still hear hooves, not galloping, just trotting softly across a field where no one is watching anymore. Mitanni never claimed to last. It borrowed gods, it borrowed words, and when the empires sharpened their knives, Mitanni simply stepped back. Not cowardice, not failure, just peace. The kingdom folded its maps, returned its pens, and let the dust rewrite its lines. You are not here to mourn it. You are here to feel how softly a civilization can disappear, and as your breath slows to match the stillness of these fields, you understand why no one remembered where Washakani went. It went nowhere. It just became sleep. The mountains come before you do. You feel them rising long before your feet touch stone. They don't shout their altitude. They simply lean into the sky with the quiet certainty of things that have always been, and somewhere high in their creases, between the clouds that roll like wool and the lakes that sit still as mirrors, the kingdom of Urartu once glowed like an ember, not the flame of conquest, but the glow of obsidian, of firelight behind stone walls, of something powerful choosing not to burn brightly, but to burn quietly. You walk a mountain pass that once connected forts and citadels, not wide Roman roads, but narrow, winding traces carved into living rock. Below you, the vast blue of Lake Van, still as thought, and above you, the remains of towers, their stones blackened, their edges softened by wind. Urartu's capital once stood here, perhaps beneath your feet, though time has chewed the outlines. Away, not gone, just tired. They called their land Bianili, a name swallowed by the sounds of cuneiform and basalt. But to others, to Assyrians, to later scribes, it was Urartu, a shadow between empires. Their kings wrote nothing of grand mythologies. Instead, they carved inventories, goats, bronze, stone walls, prayers to gods with names that echo like wind in caverns. Their script was sharp, their stones heavy, but their story, even at its loudest, never pushed past a whisper. You kneel at a sun-warmed platform once used for offerings. The stone here is black, volcanic, cool in the morning, hot by mid-afternoon. Nearby, fragments of a tablet poke from the soil. If you were to lift it, the words might still speak. But so many of these records were turned to ash by the hands that wrote them. Near the kingdom's end, Urartu's own people burned their archives, not in panic, but in ritual, as if to say, this ends here. Let memory stay within stone, not on it. Why burn your own history? Why extinguish your own voice? You ask. The mountain, and it gives no answer, only a rustle of thin air over sparse grass. But somewhere in that wind, you imagine the intention, not erasure, but release, to let their words rise like smoke instead of being buried like bones. Wasn't small. It spanned from eastern Anatolia into what we now call Armenia and down toward Mesopotamia. It stood against the Assyrians and traded with kingdoms whose names have also softened into sleep. But the Urartians built high. They built inward. Their fortresses sit on cliffs, carved right into the shoulders of the earth. Their canals still survive, threading water across high plateaus where no one asks it to go anymore. You find yourself within the broken frame of one such fortress, its base still stubborn, its top long gone. The air is thinner here, and each breath feels older. Moss grows in the corners, but not much. A few bird calls echo. You imagine a soldier posted at this lookout centuries ago, watching the horizon not for an enemy, but for a cloud, a shift in wind, a returning rider from a lower valley. The enemy came, eventually, as they always do. But by then, Erato had already begun to fold itself. Its temples closed, its script vanished, and even its gods, Aldi Sabini, Taispas, were offered one last prayer and then gently shelved. The people didn't vanish. They became someone else. The kingdom wasn't crushed. It stepped away, like smoke when the fire runs out of reason. You sit now at the edge of that old citadel, looking down toward water that still holds the reflection of mountains, unchanged, unspeaking. You could sleep here and feel no fear. The silence is not empty. It's full of words that were never shouted, names that were never branded into stone for glory, full of an empire that burned its own end into story. You inhale, the air tastes of rock and past fire. You exhale, and it tastes like peace. Urarta didn't lose. It ended itself with the grace of ash, and the smoke still rises, not in flames, but in memory. You close your eyes, and the mountains hum softly around you, holding the quiet shape of a kingdom that never needed to be loud to last forever. You begin this night's journey across a land that holds its history close, like a breath drawn in and never quite released. The hills are gentle here, rolled like folded cloth, and the earth is warm underfoot, a deep reddish brown, touched by centuries of rain and ritual. There is no thunder announcing what lies ahead, just a quiet path winding through scrub and sun-worn trees. And there, as the sky begins to shift into its violet hush, rise the curved stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, not in ruin, but in stillness. No cement binds these granite blocks together. They were placed, one atop the other, by hand and by memory. Every stone nestled with care, holding itself in place through patience, not pressure. You approach slowly, running your fingers across the cool surface. It doesn't feel abandoned. It feels paused, like a thought someone once had, almost finished, then set aside gently to dream. This was once a great city, the center of a kingdom that stretched across rivers and valleys and mines glittering with gold. Not myth, not rumor. Real trade flowed from here, ivory, copper, and coins shaped by other continents. Chinese porcelain has been found here, Persian glass, threads from the Indian Ocean carried goods and stories to its people, and yet, Great Zimbabwe left little behind that shouted. No royal tombs, no grand statues, only silence carved into form. You step through an open entrance in the stone wall. The passage narrows, curves, widens again, a kind of choreography in stone. Inside, the great enclosure surrounds you, a dry-stacked marvel of design and direction. The walls rise like slow waves, their arc deliberate, their height surprising. Some say it was a royal residence, others say a temple. No one knows for sure, and perhaps the stones prefer it that way. Farther in, you find the conical tower, tall, smooth, solid, unbroken. It isn't a fortress, it isn't a tomb. It has no windows, no doors. A symbol, maybe, or a storage for grain, or something more abstract, a gesture in stone. It stands like a punctuation mark, reminding you that not all stories are told in words. There were kings here, yes, the Razvi and the Shona, ancestors whose voices you can still feel in the wind. The people who built this did not leave books. They left walls, and those walls speak slowly. They tell you that greatness does not always need conquest, that wealth can sit quietly behind carved stone, that not every empire builds upward. Some build inward, grounding themselves into the earth they loved, and yet, for all its grace, great Zimbabwe eventually fell into silence. The reasons curl like smoke. Climate may have changed, resources may have dwindled, trade routes may have shifted, but there were no battles here, no sieges, no smoke on the horizon, just a long exhale. People left, not in fear, not in fire, just in time. The colonial world that came later didn't want to believe such a place could be built by Africans. The stone walls were too perfect, too refined, too ancient to belong to people whose stories hadn't been written in books. So for a while, even the silence was stolen. But the walls held, and now the truth, quiet, elegant, certain, sits exactly where it always did. You sit with it now. The moon leans low over the southern sky. The wind carries nothing but the sound of your breath and a few insects turning in for the night. In this sacred circle of stone, sleep feels native. Time folds in, and you, like the city, begin to disappear into it. Not lost, not forgotten, just ... unspoken. You don't need to know what every wall meant. You don't need to see the gold. You are already inside the treasure. The silence is the story. And you are part of it now, so lie back. Let the stone remember for you. Great Zimbabwe didn't fall. It simply rested, just like you. You begin this part of your journey at the edge of land, where the waves roll in, not just to meet the shore, but to erase it. The wind carries the salt of centuries. The water, warm and patient, pulls at the coastline like fingers trying to remember a forgotten song. Somewhere beneath these calm tides once stood Dwarka, a city older than certainty, whose story is told both by legend and by the sea. The sun hangs low, orange and liquid, shimmering across the western coast of India. You sit near the Gulf of Kutch, where the Arabian Sea gently sways, washing over stones that might have once been steps, or walls, or nothing. Divers have found strange shapes down there, blocks aligned to precisely, patterns too regular to be natural. And yet, the ocean keeps its secrets, while Dwarka is best known through myth, the shimmering city said to have been ruled by Krishna, Lord of Dusk and Dialogue, who built it to escape the pull of war and karma. They say it was a city of gold and symmetry, where palaces stood atop foundations of coral and silver. They say that when Krishna left the world, the sea came for Dwarka, not in rage, but in inevitability, as if the city had been borrowed from the earth and had to be returned. But maybe that was just the first time. You walk the sands of modern Dwarka, a small town of pilgrims and priests, where temples lean toward, the waves and bells chime to no particular rhythm. Beneath the surface, scattered across the seabed, lie stones and fragments, pillars, half-buried steps that lead to silt. The archaeological whispers began in the late 20th century. Sonar readings, submerged grids, theories of ancient ports. Some say these were the remains of a Harappan outpost. Others, a memory that never stopped flickering in the minds of sailors and storytellers. You close your eyes and listen. The waves repeat themselves, not because they forget, but because they remember too well. You picture the first walker, rising brick by brick, shoreline by shoreline, a maritime city where boats once docked beside market stalls, where incense burned beneath polished domes, and fishermen watched the horizon for more than just fish. This was not a city of war, it was a city of arrival, and just as gently it disappeared. Then it returned, or tried to. Dwarka was rebuilt again and again, in different places, under different names. The current city is the 7th, or the 12th, or perhaps just the latest in a long dream the sea keeps dreaming. Each time the people come back. Each time the sea reminds them how stories are carried in tides as well as texts. You stand now on the shore, where stone steps descend directly into the water. The temple above you, Dwarkadish, still rings with prayer. Pilgrims walk barefoot, brushing past you with murmured greetings. They believe the city beneath their feet is more than history. It's memory, it's prophecy. It's a place that was and will be again. The sea doesn't argue. It rises when it must. It lets you see what you need to, just briefly, before swallowing it once more. Dwarka was never just one city. It was a conversation between land and water, between permanence and surrender, between the known and the felt. You walk into the waves up to your knees. The water holds you as if welcoming you home. You imagine the columns beneath, silent, barnacled, forgotten. You imagine lights dancing once above them, laughter, music, the creak of boats. Then stillness. There is no tragedy here. Only return. Dwarka was taken, yes, but not stolen. The sea did not destroy it. It carried it back into itself, like a child collecting shells and returning them to the tide. Now the waves nudge your ankles. The moon rises soft and low, and your thoughts begin to dissolve, not like ruins, but like foam. This was a kingdom that rose from salt and returned to sleep in it, and so do you. Sleep settles easier in a forest, especially one that remembers. The air is thick with pine, the ground soft with needles, and in the quiet rhythm of rustling leaves, you begin to hear a story, not one of conquest or collapse, but of balance, of a kingdom where the throne was shared, not seized, where women wore crowns of gold, filigree, and kings ruled not with fire, but with stillness. This is Scylla, the southeastern kingdom of ancient Korea, whose beauty was in its gentleness, and whose vanishing felt more like a pause than an end. You walk through Jungjun, the old capital, though the city barely whispers its name now. It's calm here, more garden than monument. The streets roll softly between rounded burial mounds, green and unbroken, like sleeping giants resting beneath layers of time. These are the tombs of Scylla's rulers, sealed without spectacle, wrapped in soil and patience. The people still call this city a museum without walls. But what you feel is something deeper, a stillness that has outlived its empire. In the early centuries, Scylla was small, a confederation more than a kingdom, clans woven together by lineage, not lineage, sharpened into dynasty. And at the heart of its golden age, Scylla did something rare. It shared. Kings and queens rose not in rebellion, but in rhythm. For a time, women ruled without apology, their names etched in records alongside men, their decisions respected, their crowns just as heavy. Queen Ciandiok ruled with intelligence and foresight, commissioning observatories, gardens, and poems. She did not need to conquer to be remembered. She ruled as if the future could be grown, not taken. You pause now beneath the tall form of Kimseongdae, the oldest astronomical observatory in East Asia, built of stacked stone. Its hourglass shape blends into the evening light. It doesn't impose, it invites. You imagine a scholar there, centuries ago, watching the stars not for omens of war, but to mark the quiet return of seasons. Scylla believed in cycles, in time that curled gently rather than marched forward. And gold, yes, Scylla had gold, but it did not flaunt it in towers or tributes. It braided it into crowns, delicate and tree-like, with antlered branches rising skyward. You picture a young monarch donning such a crown, not for glory, but to become part of something older than themselves. The crowns weren't just ornaments, they were roots reaching up, an empire grounded in ceremony. When Buddhism arrived, Scylla welcomed it like rain. Monasteries bloomed across its hillsides. Stone Buddhas were carved into cliffs not as commands, but as reminders. You imagine pilgrims bowing low before them, not fearing gods, but finding breath. Even at its height, Scylla felt contemplative, a kingdom turned inward, humming instead of shouting. But kingdoms, even the quiet ones, are never still forever. Unity came with cost. After unifying most of the Korean peninsula, Scylla grew complex. Then bloated, conflicts brewed. The shared crown began to tremble, not in rage, but in weariness. The capital slowly emptied. The tombs stopped growing. And as newer dynasties stirred in the north, Scylla folded itself, respectfully, into memory. You lie down now in the grass near one of those tombs. It is smooth, green, and round like a hill made for dreams. No name is carved on the outside. The name is inside, and it sleeps well. The sky is dimming, and a few lanterns flicker in the distance, carried by unseen hands. You feel the pulse of an old city that never fought to stay alive, only to be remembered softly. Scylla was not boring in spite of its peace. It was beautiful because of it. Its kings shared, its queens ruled. Its silence outlasted its walls, and now you, too, rest beneath its sky. No conquest, no ceremony, just stillness. You fall asleep as the forest leans in, not to whisper secrets, but to remind you that some kingdoms end not with a crash, but with a bow. Asterisk, there are places in history where empires rise with all the noise of certainty, with drums, with declarations, with the press of wheels against stone. But there are also empires that disappear more slowly, like a fog receding into air, leaving behind no war cry, no last ruler's desperate words, only softened names and cracked tablets in the mud. Tonight you stand upon one of those silences. Beneath your feet, beneath layers of soil, time, and polite amnesia, lie the bones of the Hittite Empire, once mighty, once methodical, and now almost entirely folded into sleep. The night air is dry and cool as you step along a winding path in what was once central Anatolia, now quiet Turkey, but long ago the heart of an empire that rivaled Egypt and Babylon in size, diplomacy, and confidence. You're standing somewhere near Hattusa, the ancient capital, though like so many places in history, its edges have softened with time. No highways lead to it now, no signs in bold point the way, only a few buried stones, a scattering of inscriptions, and the memory of a people who spoke a language that for centuries was unreadable. Like a whisper sealed in a jar, the Hittites did not just rule. They organized, they archived, they recorded. Their scribes wrote in cuneiform, their laws laid out in rows, their treaties preserved with careful formality. The Hittites signed one of the world's first known peace treaties, the Treaty of Kadesh with Ramesses II of Egypt. These were not men of chaos. They valued clarity, and yet, when the time came, the order they built simply stopped. You imagine a Hittite administrator, seated at a wooden table near sunset, lamp flickering with animal fat, looking over a map, not one with colors and coastlines, but lines traced onto clay, river shapes, trade routes, the position of client kings and cities that owed tribute. His hand hovers, uncertain. Somewhere, a border has moved. A shipment has not arrived. A scribal mark is out of place. He pauses, frowns gently, then continues writing. Perhaps he knows what's coming. Perhaps no one does. Their capital, Hattusa, was a marvel. Its gates, the Lion Gate, the King's Gate, carved from limestone, framed in confidence. Its archives held thousands of tablets, and then, over what seems only a few decades, all of it faded. Not destroyed by one war, but thinned by many. Pressures, climate change, migration, internal unrest, external exhaustion. The cities were not burned so much as emptied. The tablets stopped being written. Roads fell into fields. The great empire lost not a battle, but its bearing, and that, more than anything, is what lingers the sense of disorientation. The Hittites, masters of protocol, architects of order, simply stopped knowing where their roads led. Their client kingdoms peeled away like quiet leaves. The center stopped holding, and what once seemed solid dissolved into uncharted quiet. You sit now beside the great stones of what may have been a temple or a granary. There are no guards, no signs, just earth and time, and the gentle hum of wind against ancient walls. The stars above you twinkle without need for empire. The world continues, not because someone commands it to, but because it knows how later, when historians and archaeologists rediscovered Hattusa in the 19th century, they began to decipher the clay tablets. They learned of superlulium, of royal oaths, of grain counts and horse training. But even now, so much remains uncertain. Why did the empire collapse so fully? Why did its language vanish? Why do we have so much writing from them and so little understanding? It's as if the Hittites themselves erased their north, and without it, no one could find the rest. But you are not here to solve them. You are here to rest in their absence. You are here to feel how an empire can fade not through fire, but through forgetting. How a road can vanish not when it crumbles, but when no one walks it anymore. You breathe in, slow and steady, the scent of stone and lichen. You listen, not for voices, but for the shape of silence left behind, and in that silence, something stirs, not a warning, not a lesson, just a soft acknowledgement. Even the most mapped places can get lost. Even the loudest empires can fall so quietly that no one notices until the dust is already settled. And even then, the dust does not cry out. It simply waits for someone like you, centuries later, to come and sit beside it and understand. You feel your body settle into stillness, spine curving like a road once drawn and then untraced. You are not lost. You are only off the map. And in this space without north, you find rest. The Hittites did not fall, they faded. And they left no footsteps to follow, only the peace of not needing to be found. The desert never forgets, but it doesn't always speak. It holds memory in the slope of its dunes, in the still air that drapes across its cliffs, and in the quiet stone that survives long after breath has stopped. Tonight, you find yourself in Deir el-Bahari, tucked between the limestone ridges west of the Nile. The stars above stretch endlessly, but your eyes rest not on the sky nor the river, but on the slow, commanding shape of a temple carved directly into the mountain. A terrace rising in symmetry and silence. This is the temple of Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as pharaoh, and then chose to vanish. You walk forward, your footsteps hushed by sand and scale. Her temple doesn't loom, it invites. 3 colonnaded levels stacked in harmony, like a breath, drawn in and exhaled evenly. Pillars still stand, squared and sure, holding the memory of processions and prayers. Hatshepsut built this place to last, not to tower over her world, but to lie down gently within it. And yet the world did not lie gently with her. Born into royalty during Egypt's 18th dynasty, she was daughter of Thutmose I, wife and stepmother to Thutmose III. And when the throne became empty, she did not wait to be invited. She rose, first as regent, then as Karula, and finally as pharaoh, not queen, not consort pharaoh. She donned the royal beard, took on the masculine titles, and governed not in pretense, but in practice. Her rule was long, and her rule was good. Egypt prospered, temples multiplied, trade flowed. Her ships sailed down the Red Sea to Punt, returning with incense trees and exotic goods that bent the imagination. She didn't conquer by sword, she conquered by style. She inscribed her story into stone, painted it across walls, her divine birth, her right to rule, her legacy crafted with the same patience that carved her temple, and then, after her death, the chisel came. Her name was erased from monuments, her statues torn down or buried, her legacy scratched from the walls of time, not completely, never completely, but enough to dim her memory for millennia. Egypt remembered her softly, if at all, until archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries began to uncover the traces. The pieces were still there, a name here, a likeness hidden beneath another. She had not vanished. She had simply been silenced, gently but deliberately, as though history itself had blinked. You sit now on the cool stone of her terrace, the cliffs behind you dark but embracing, like a protector. You try to imagine her walking here, robes trailing, hands outstretched toward offering tables. The sun would have been bright, the air full of chanting and dust. She ruled as a man, but not in rejection of womanhood, in command of both. A fluidity that would only be honored centuries later, though she lived it without needing the permission of time. Perhaps the erasure wasn't only about her gender or power. Perhaps it was also about discomfort with someone who had led to, well, who had rewritten too smoothly the line between exception and rule. When Thutmose III reclaimed sole kingship, it was easier to clear the slate than to carry her name forward. Yet the slate didn't stay clean for long. Her story returned in fragments and shadows, like seeds buried in sand, waiting for the right wind to bloom. And here you are now, long after her story was meant to be over, sitting quietly in the soft gravity of her creation. The temple doesn't demand your attention, it earns it. Its angles glow faintly under moonlight. The carvings, some faded, some fierce, still speak. They don't ask to be believed. They ask to be felt. You lean against a stone, your eyes beginning to drift. Her name, once carved out, now whispers itself back into the air. not a queen pretending, a pharaoh forgotten and re-remembered. Her legacy was not undone, it was only paused. And isn't that how memory works? It dims, it burrows, it rests in quiet corners. But it waits, so does she, and so do you. The air grows cooler, the cliffs hold their breath, and you sleep beside a temple carved not for conquest, but for return. The night folds around you like a cotton robe left out in the sun, soft and warm, whispering only when the wind shifts. You are in the heart of the Sahara, but the sand doesn't scream, it hushes. Each grain drifts as if moving through thought. Beneath your feet, the ground holds stories, not carved in stone or buried in gold, but inked in black script on yellowing paper, tucked inside wooden boxes, behind thick adobe walls. This is Timbuktu, the city the world once imagined was only legend, but it was real, and it was quiet, and it read more than it spoke. You walk slowly through the maze of streets, their lines softened by centuries of wind. The houses curve in the Sahelian style, flat rooftops, earthen walls, narrow alleys where shadows stretch long. In the distance, the Sanka Mosque rises like a sandcastle molded by scholars rather than waves, its mud brick minarets crowned with wooden beams that lean into the open sky. But it isn't just the mosques that hold knowledge here. It's the homes, the trunks, the silence between breaths. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Timbuktu was a beacon not of battle, but of books. While kingdoms warred and walls were built taller elsewhere, here knowledge gathered like rain in a dry basin. Merchants brought salt, gold, and ivory, yes, but also poetry, astronomy, medicine, law, and love. Manuscripts written in Arabic, in Songhai, in Tomashek, scrolls of algebra and astrology, commentaries on Plato and Euclid, pages so fragile they folded time into script. You enter a house with a low doorway and a wide inner courtyard, shaded by a fig tree. Inside, the light filters through narrow slits in the wall, illuminating motes of dust that drift as slowly as thought. In the corner rests a chest, plain and heavy. It creaks as it opens. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth and old leather, lie books no one has read in generations. But they are not forgotten. They are sleeping like you will be soon. You touch the edge of one page. It flakes slightly, but the ink still holds. The handwriting is careful, deliberate. The lines curved and nested, not rushed. Written not to impress, but to preserve. You don't need to read the words to feel them. They settle into the room like breath. These weren't books for spectacle. They were not trophies of empire. They were tools, vessels, confidants, and many of them never left their shelves. Not because they were unwanted, but because they had already served their purpose. Being there, and when threats came, colonialism, fire, war, neglect, the people of Timbuktu did not cry out. They quietly hid the books, in caves, in barrels, in tin boxes, under beds, carried them by hand, one by one, into the desert's safer arms. Entire families took turns watching over the manuscripts, dusting them, copying them, breathing with them. In silence, in love, the world remembered Timbuktu too late. It imagined it was merely a myth, a mirage of wealth, a city built of gold. But Timbuktu never needed gold. Its treasure was always ink, thought, patience. It had universities when some places had only fortresses. Its libraries outlasted kingdoms. And even as it faded from maps, its pages never stopped murmuring. You sit now in the courtyard, a book resting beside you, unopened. You don't need to disturb it. The knowledge is not in the opening, it's in the being. The quiet confidence that even unspoken, something sacred has been carried forward. You watch the dust settle. You feel your eyes soften. The fig leaves above sway gently, as if reading their own shadow. The books never shouted. They never begged to be read. They simply waited, with their backs straight, their pages folded like prayers. Just like the city, just like you. And now, beneath the stars and the softened call to prayer drifting on the wind, you understand some knowledge is not for noise, some history is not for performance. It is simply the kind that knows you and lets you sleep without asking for anything in return. The air is dry, but not harsh. It carries the smell of sun-baked earth and ash, as if something once burned here a long time ago. Not in destruction, but in ritual. You stand not on the edge of a ruin, but in the cradle of a city that was ancient before history had calendars, before gods had names. This is Catalyak, where people lived not under empires, but under the same roof. A place with no streets, no palaces, no grand gates, only homes, stacked close and touching. Like the dreams of 1,000 sleepers pressed into clay, you walk across the high steppe of central Turkey, wind brushing low across scattered grasses and cracked soil. The mound that hides Catalyak rises like a forgotten breath, unassuming, gentle, but deep. Beneath your feet lie the layers of time. Literally, this place wasn't abandoned and then rediscovered. It was lived upon, again and again, for over 1,000 years. Each new house built atop the last, every generation pressing its present into the past. A slow, deliberate, vertical memory. There were no kings here, no armies, no engraved names etched in pride. And yet, this city, if we dare call it that, held thousands of people together. They lived in rectangular homes of mud brick, entered from the roof, moving through ladders rather than doorways. There were no roads between them, no alleys, just rooftops like sidewalks, passageways of sky. You imagine a child hopping from one house to the next, as easily as a sparrow moves from branch to branch. Inside, the rooms were warm with plaster, red with ochre, decorated with paintings of leopards, vultures, women giving birth, hands pressed onto walls like early punctuation marks. The dead were buried under the floors, grandmothers sleeping beneath grandchildren. Life moved in circles. Even the ovens were small, communal, enough for flatbread and memory. People worked, they watched. Stars, they watched each other, and they rested. You step into a reconstruction of one of these homes, a small, square chamber with low ceilings, a central hearth, and nothing designed to impress. But you feel something here, something not heavy with story, but light with presence. The walls hold soot, the floor holds echoes. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat and listen, not for words, for rhythm. Catalyak did not need monuments. Its monument was ritual. Rooms dedicated to animals, walls painted with wild hunts, bulls with impossible horns, shrines made of skulls, not as trophies but as memories. The people here didn't worship from a distance. They lived with the sacred. They lived in it. Their gods, if they had them, weren't thunderous. They were local, intimate. The divine was not something they traveled to find. It was in the oven, in the ladder, in the breath, and yet, after centuries, they left. Slowly, the houses stopped stacking. The fires cooled. Another place was found, And, like so many early cities, Çatalhöyük disappeared not in conquest but in change. No war, no famine, no final disaster, just the kind of quiet migration that history rarely writes down. The mound grew over, time packed itself into soil. The dreams stayed, but they stopped breathing. You lie down now on the ancient rooftop, watching the moon cast soft shadows on the plains. The wind here is older than roads. The stars flicker like they did for the people who once lived beneath them without wondering who ruled the world. They didn't need roads. They didn't need kings. They had one another. They had warmth. They had stories told in smoke. And now you sleep where they once did, not far above their bones, not far from the fire, held by the same wind, cradled by the same stillness. Çatalhöyük was not lost. It was folded, tucked gently into the earth's pocket like a glass bead, buried not to be forgotten, but to be found when the world was quiet enough to listen again. And tonight you are that listener. Sleep now, in the city that never shouted, never ruled, never ran, just gathered, and warmed, and disappeared. Asterisk, there are names in history that don't belong to places. They belong to moods. Thule is one of them. You hear it, and something inside you drifts, not toward certainty, but toward wonder. A syllable that sounds like mist rolling over water, like a whisper made of ice, like a memory someone else had, and you've only inherited the feeling of it. Thule was never just a point on a map. It was a direction toward the edge of the world, where the stars changed their tempo and the sun forgot how to set. You begin your journey not on the island itself, but in the pages of those who believed. It was real. The geographer Pytheas, sailing from ancient Greece in the 4th century BCE, described it after a voyage that took him beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond Britannia, to a land where the sea turned to a jelly-like mass and day stretched almost endlessly. He called it Ultima Thule, the furthest north, the end of knowing. But he never said exactly where it was. And so the maps began to guess. Medieval cartographers etched it into their scrolls and parchments, drawing it high above Norway, or to the west of Iceland, or floating near Greenland like a half-remembered island. Some maps gave it mountains, others monasteries. Some painted beasts there, some painted nothing. But always Thule sat in the far corners of ink. Not because it was found, but because it wasn't. You sit now in a quiet room, lit only by candlelight. An open atlas before you. The parchment smells of salt and thyme. Your fingers trace the curved lines of ocean and margin. There, in a smudge of blue near the top, lies Thule. No coordinates, just possibility. The cartographer wasn't drawing land, he was drawing longing. He didn't need to arrive. He just needed to believe that such a place had existed, or could. And perhaps it did. Not as one single island, but as many. Maybe Thule was Shetland, or Iceland, or even a northern part of Norway under another name. Or maybe it was Neverland. At all just a metaphor for the farthest place a person could imagine before imagination thinned into sleep. Thule became shorthand for the unreachable, the unknowable, the part of the world that doesn't need to be touched to be real. And in time, that's what it turned into, an island made of expectation. You picture a sailor standing on the deck of a wooden ship, breath fogging in the Arctic air, scanning a horizon that refuses to hold still. The light stretches strange, the sun floating long above the water, never quite setting, never fully rising. The waves whisper secrets in a language older than the compass. And out there, just out of reach, is Thule. Always Thule. Not promising gold, not promising glory, just an invitation to believe in distance. Centuries passed. The maps grew more accurate. Longitude and latitude replaced mystery with mathematics. The edges of the world were trimmed. The blank corners were filled in. And one day, someone simply stopped drawing Thule, not because it was proven false, but because it wasn't needed anymore. A cartographic silence. A decision to end the sentence, but the story doesn't vanish. It lingers in old books, in sailors' journals, in the poetic footnotes of explorers who dared to chase a place that might only exist in the imagination. And it lingers in you, too, tonight as you lie back beneath a sky darkened not by shadow, but by distance. The stars pulse slowly above. The cold is quiet and kind. And you understand what Thule always meant. It meant that something could be lost without ever being found. That a place could be more beautiful as an idea than as a destination. That not all maps are made to guide. Some are made to wander. And in that wander, you begin to drift. You don't need to find Thule. You're already there, wrapped in the hum of not knowing. You sleep in the curve of the last line drawn, not at the center of the world, but at its softest, gentlest edge. The ground beneath you is sun-bleached and calm, cracked like pottery left in the open air. Too long, but not broken. You feel it before you see it. The sensation of a place that once thrived in order, where people didn't merely survive, but lived in alignment with water, heat, and sky. There are no towers here, no statues of kings, no pyramids, no conquest carved in stone. Instead, the city of Mohenjo-Daro greets you with quiet, an ancient hush arranged in straight lines, like a deep breath that never had to be raised in voice. You step into its memory carefully. The buildings rise only waist-high now, there. Upper stories long since returned to dust, but the layout still holds. Streets run in straight, thoughtful lines. Drainage channels trace the edges. Courtyards open like pauses in a long, rhythmic sentence. This city, nearly 5,000 years old, was part of the Indus Valley civilization, one of the oldest urban societies on Earth. And yet it left behind no names of kings, no stories of battle, no epic poems of divine descent. What remains is structure, soft, democratic order, a life designed not around war, but around water. You stand at the edge of what scholars call the Great Bath, a deep, rectangular pool lined with brick, thought to be ceremonial, though no one is quite sure. The steps leading down are worn and symmetrical. You picture a woman descending slowly into its cool depths, not to cleanse her body, but her breath. Perhaps it was not a bath, but a place of gathering, a still mirror beneath the open sky where people washed in silence before returning to the rhythm of their day. The homes were modest, often 2 stories high, with small inner courtyards, private wells, and intricate drainage, simple, elegant proof of a society that prioritized cleanliness, privacy, and peace. There is no central palace, no looming temple, just neighborhoods, a city that looks like it was designed by consensus, not command. No sign of slavery, no evidence of large-scale violence. Even their weights and measures were standardized, suggesting trade built on mutual trust rather than coercion. Civilization, not empire. You walk the streets now, your shadow following you in long lines between the baked bricks. The walls around you whisper nothing loud. They do not demand admiration, but the precision hums. This was a city of quiet engineers, of planners who thought beyond their lifetimes. Everything here, the wells, the courtyards, the even spacing of homes suggests a people who built for stability, not spectacle, and yet Mohenjo-daro vanished, not in flames, not under conquest. There is no record of battle, no final scene etched in ash. The city seems to have emptied itself, slowly, like water draining from a vessel. Climate change, shifting rivers, perhaps declining trade, no one knows for certain. But whatever the reason, the departure was gentle, a letting go, not a collapse. You sit now against the wall of a half-standing house. The bricks are warm from the day's heat. There's a faint breeze curling down the alley, like a voice that no longer needs to speak. In the distance, the Indus River still moves, though not where it once did. The people of Mohenjo-daro are gone, but they did not die screaming. They simply walked away, leaving their city open like a book no longer needed, the kind you carry, in memory rather than in hand, and perhaps that is what makes it linger. The absence of trauma, the refusal to glorify itself. Mohenjo-daro does not demand to be remembered. It just continues, softly, underfoot. You close your eyes now. Let your spine align with the straight lines of the city. Let your breath slow, like the waters that once ran beneath its floors. Let the silence not be emptiness, but ease. This was a city that needed no crown, only flow, only order, only time, and as the sky deepens and the stars begin to hum their quiet mathematics, you fall into sleep, not as someone fleeing, but as someone arriving in a place that has been waiting in calm geometry for you to understand. The desert at night feels like a cathedral. The air is crisp, almost still, and above you the sky curves in perfect silence. Stars burn cold but gentle. You walk slowly through a narrow canyon, walls of sandstone rising on both sides like melted candle wax, streaked with mineral reds and yellows, carved not by chisel, but by wind, by patience, by time. This is Petra, once the heart of the Nabatean kingdom, and now one of the quietest ruins in the world, not for lack of visitors, but because the stones themselves have learned how to hold silence. You pass through the sick, the winding entrance, corridor that feels more like a dream than a passage. The ground underfoot is smooth, pressed by thousands of years. Every turn reveals a new wall, new light, until finally, slowly, you arrive at the treasury, Al-Khazn. It glows even at night, its facade cut straight into rose-red rock, rising 2 stories high, ornamented with columns, carvings, and a sense of intentional mystery. And yet, no scroll tells you why it was built. No inscription boasts the deeds of the ruler who commanded it. The Nabateans didn't leave explanations. They left form. You sit on a stone bench across from the treasury and look up. It doesn't tower over you, it waits. That's what their architecture feels like. Not an announcement, not a monument, a stillness carved into being. And Petra is full of these temples, tombs, houses, cisterns, streets, and staircases carved into rock. A city both hidden and displayed. But the true marvel is not what they built, it's what they didn't say. The Nabateans were traders, desert navigators, who turned the harshness of landscape into advantage. They controlled the incense routes that wove through Arabia to the Mediterranean. They were wealthy, skilled, and private. They absorbed influences from Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, yet never gave themselves fully to any one culture. Their art blended styles, Their script evolved, their gods shifted, and through it all they spoke little. You wander into what was once a neighborhood. The caves are empty now, carved chambers with soot-stained ceilings. You imagine families here, drinking coffee, tending goats, trading news. No palaces, no court records, just homes dug deep into stone. At night, they must have looked up at the same sky as you, hearing the same wind spiral through narrow canyons. A people who lived beside rock, not above it. Even their language left few traces. They used Aramaic, but with a Nabatean script that slowly melted into early Arabic. Their writing appears, briefly, softly, on pottery, on cliff walls, but never in volume. No grand archives, no royal decrees. The Nabateans spoke mostly in the movements of caravans, the layout of reservoirs, the echo of carved steps. When the Romans absorbed Petra into their empire, there was no recorded resistance, no last stand. The Nabateans faded with the same grace they lived, and still Petra remains. Long after the people vanished, the city stayed, not growing, not crumbling, just being. It was lost to outsiders for centuries, hidden by time and shifting sand, until a Swiss explorer dressed as a local rediscovered it in the 1800s. But the locals had always known. The place didn't need to be found. It just needed to be left alone long enough for the noise to clear. You stretch out now on the warm stone, the facade of the treasury casting a long, protective shadow. The rock beneath you is smooth, not cold. You breathe in the faint mineral scent of the canyon. This kingdom didn't fall. It simply didn't invite a conclusion. No drama, no tombs of kings inscribed with timelines. Just the erosion of presence. And perhaps that's the most elegant kind of leaving. You begin to drift. Not because you're bored, but because this stillness has a rhythm. Because the stones have already sung their softest song. Because the Nabateans understood that disappearance, too, can be a form of expression. No war, no last chapter. Only a closing breath, shared by wind and rock and memory. You close your eyes, and the canyon closes around you, not in darkness, but in rest. The sea is close, though you don't hear it yet. Only the wind, steady and round, like breath made visible. You walk along the northern edge of Orkney, where Scotland's mainland has already faded behind the horizon, and what remains is softness. Rolling green hills, the scent of wet earth and salt, and a quiet so thick it feels like it's listening. And then, nestled in a dip near the coast, you see it, a cluster of low stone rooms, half buried in earth and time, as if someone had gently placed the village into the land and tucked a blanket of grass over it before walking away. This is Skara Brae, and it has been waiting for you for nearly 5,000 years. You descend into the past without climbing. The houses are only a few feet below. The surface, exposed not by excavation, but by a storm, an act of weather, pulling back the layers of forgetting. Before the storm, there was just a grassy mound, unremarkable. And then the wind howled, and the soil peeled away, and suddenly the oldest preserved houses in northern Europe stood in the open air once more, intact, surprised, still holding their breath. You step into one of the homes. The walls are made of flat stone, fitted without mortar, shaped by patience more than ambition. In the center lies a hearth, still outlined in ash-dark shadow. Around it, built into the walls, are stone shelves and box beds, not luxurious, but deliberate. There's even what looks like a stone dresser, and in that moment you feel something familiar, not ancient, not foreign, just human. Whoever lived here, you can imagine them clearly. They warmed their hands by the fire. They stored tools in neat places. They slept under roofs made of whalebone and turf. They walked barefoot in winter. They listened to the oceans. Lullaby, they argued. They laughed. They aged. They died. And yet, none of that feels heavy. It feels still, like a song that hummed itself to quiet before the last note finished. There are 8 houses, linked by low, covered passages, as if the people who built them knew the wind here would always be a little too sharp. The passageways bend gently. The rooms are rounder than square, less rigid than those of later empires. Nothing here shouts. It all suggests a civilization not of conquerors, but of caretakers. There are no weapons buried here, no grand tombs, no monuments to ego, just shared space, a community made of rhythm and stone. No one knows why they left. Maybe it was climate, the warming and cooling of the earth nudging them inland. Maybe the tides changed. Maybe they simply moved on. But there are no signs of destruction, no sign of panic. The village wasn't destroyed. It was outgrown, like a childhood coat left neatly on a hook. And it waited. And when the sea finally arrived, inch by inch, wave by wave, it didn't roar, it just rearranged the edges of memory. It softened the mound. It wrapped Skara Brae in a blanket of sand and silence, and the village fell asleep. You sit now in the center of the largest home, the fire pit cold but kind. There are no spirits here asking to be heard, no ghosts in need of release, only the lingering hush of a life well lived, unrecorded. The wind outside sings through the open walls, and somewhere in that hum is the voice of the sea. Returning to check on what it left behind, you lean your head against the stone wall. It is cool, but it doesn't resist. It holds you the way a house does when you are too tired to move. And you think about all the homes that once looked like this, all the people who thought this place would last forever. It did not, but that does not mean it failed. It was simply finished, and so, too, are you. Finished for now, not broken, not lost, just ready to rest. Let the wind thread its way through stone and story. Let the sea keep its slow, patient beat. Let the grass grow higher, and you, drifting now beside the ghost of a hearth, feel the warmth of ancient hands still reaching toward the fire. Asterisk, there is a stillness to certain landscapes that feels deliberate, not empty, but full of pause. You walk through a field in the center of the American Midwest, just east of the Mississippi River, where the grass grows tall in summer and the wind slides low across open space. It feels like a park, like a place between places, but beneath your feet, beneath this softness, lies the memory of a city that once rivaled the great capitals of the world. This is Cahokia, a place so vast, so carefully built, that no one alive at the time in Europe or Asia even knew it existed. And when it was gone, it didn't tell anyone. You approach slowly. There are no ruins in the traditional sense. No marble columns or shattered temples, only mounds, rising gently from the flatness like sleeping hills. The largest is Monk's Mound, a massive fortressed earthen pyramid, shaped by human hands and patience. You climb it step by step, not to reach a summit, but to understand how much care went into its making. It took centuries of labor, layer upon layer of packed earth, carried one basket at a time, shaped to align with the sun and seasons. No stone, no script, just soil and stars. At its peak, you pause. The sky stretches wide, as it always has. You look out across the surrounding fields. 1,000 years ago, this would have been the heart of a complex metropolis. Tens of thousands of people living in wooden homes, gathering in plazas, praying, planning, planting. Traders came from distant coasts. Ceremonies were held in great circles. Observatories made of wood, not glass, traced the seasons like clockwork. And yet, no written language remains. No royal names survive. Not even a word we know for what they called themselves. The people of Cahokia built big, but they didn't build to last. Their materials were perishable: wood, thatch, woven fiber. And maybe that was the point. Their structures weren't meant to defy time, only to live fully inside it. The city's planning was meticulous. Roads aligned with the solstices. Borrow pits turned into lakes. Their city breathed, expanding and contracting with the needs of harvest and ritual. And then, over time, they left. No single reason is clear. Climate change, political strain, soil exhaustion, perhaps spiritual transition, but there was no conquest, no siege, no flames, only the quiet return of forest and field, wrapping over footprints like ivy over stone. The earth reasserted itself, and the people didn't resist. They simply moved away, and the silence followed. You descend the mound now, your steps soft against the gravel path. You pass another smaller mound, a burial site, perhaps, or a marker of ceremony. The wind carries birdsong and the distant rustle of leaves. It is not lonely here. It is layered. The trees know. The soil knows. The city hasn't been lost. It has been folded inward, and you fold with it. You sit down at the base of the mound. The grass rises around your knees. The sun begins to dip, painting the landscape in gold and shadow. In this fading light, the contours of the ancient city return, not as ruins, but as rhythm. The way the ground swells and dips, the pattern of mounds like verses in a poem, the alignment of space to sun, of silence to memory. You close your eyes and feel the hum of something buried but not gone. A city that once rose in wood and voice, and now rests in root and breeze. You don't need to hear the names. You don't need to see the palaces. The story is told in the way the land continues to hold space. Sleep now in the capital of absence, beneath a canopy of time where nothing shouts, but everything remembers.